At first, you trust your own memory. You remember what happened, what someone said, and how you felt. You don't question it. You simply remember. Then, slowly, someone starts telling you that you remember things differently. You're too sensitive. You're overthinking. That never happened. You always misunderstand me. At first, you disagree. You know what you remember. You were there. You heard the words. You felt what you felt. But then it happens again, and again, and again. Eventually, something inside you begins to change. You stop asking, "Did they lie?" and start asking, "What's wrong with me?" This is how manipulation can slowly make you doubt yourself. And the dangerous part is, it usually doesn't happen all at once. It can start with something incredibly small. Imagine a woman named Sarah. One evening, Sarah's partner promises to call her after work. He doesn't. Hours later, she asks him about it. He looks confused. "I never said I would call you." Sarah remembers the conversation clearly, but he sounds completely certain. So she checks herself. Maybe I misunderstood. The next time something similar happens, she remembers it differently again. And once again, he tells her that she's wrong. You always do this. You hear what you want to hear. You make everything into a problem. Sarah doesn't suddenly lose trust in herself. It happens much more quietly. She starts questioning little things. Did he really say that? Did I misunderstand? Was I being too emotional? Maybe I am making this bigger than it really is. And that little doubt can become a habit. You remember what happened, then you hear their version, then you question your own version, and eventually, you stop checking whether they're being honest. You start checking whether you're wrong. That's the dangerous shift. Your attention moves away from their behavior and toward everything you might be doing wrong. You replay conversations in your head. You reread old messages. You remember specific words. You try to reconstruct exactly what happened. You think about what you could have said differently. You wonder if you reacted too strongly. You wonder if your tone was wrong. You wonder if you should have stayed quiet. Sometimes, you even apologize just to end the argument. Not because you believe you were wrong, but because you're exhausted. And slowly, you become less certain of yourself. This is where manipulation becomes especially powerful, because the person doesn't necessarily have to control every decision you make. They only need you to question your ability to make those decisions. Think about it. If you trust yourself, you can disagree. You can say no. You can notice when something feels wrong. You can leave an unhealthy situation. But if you stop trusting yourself, everything becomes harder. You need someone else to tell you what happened. You need someone else to tell you how you should feel. You need someone else to tell you whether you're being reasonable. And that's when the balance of power can change. The goal isn't always to control what you do. Sometimes, it's enough to make you distrust your own judgment. Because if you don't trust yourself, you start looking to someone else for the answer. Did I really say that? Am I remembering this wrong? Was I too sensitive? Maybe I'm the problem. And once you start thinking this way, almost every disagreement becomes another reason to doubt yourself. You might start keeping quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're afraid you'll be told you're wrong again. You might stop bringing up things that bother you, because you already know how the conversation will end. You might think, it's probably not worth mentioning. So you stay quiet. Then something else happens, and you stay quiet again. Eventually, you may start changing yourself just to avoid conflict. You become more careful with your words. You watch their mood. You think before asking simple questions. You apologize faster. You explain yourself more. And you begin walking on eggshells. Not because someone explicitly told you to, but because you've learned that trusting your own perspective can lead to conflict. And that's an important distinction. Not every disagreement is manipulation. People genuinely remember events differently. People misunderstand each other. People can become defensive. People can make mistakes. A healthy relationship isn't one where everyone agrees all the time. The problem is the pattern. When someone repeatedly dismisses your reality, mocks your emotions, refuses to acknowledge obvious behavior, and makes you feel like you can't trust your own mind, that's when it's worth paying attention. Look at what happens after the conversation. Do you feel like you understood each other better? Or do you feel more confused than before? Do you feel comfortable expressing your perspective? Or do you immediately start wondering whether you're allowed to feel that way? There's another clue. Notice whether the conversation always ends with you defending yourself. You bring up something they did, and somehow, you're explaining your personality. You say you're hurt, and suddenly you're discussing why you're too sensitive. You mention something they said, and suddenly you're defending your memory. You ask for accountability, and suddenly you're apologizing. The subject keeps changing until you're the one on trial, and that can be incredibly confusing because you came into the conversation trying to understand what happened, and you leave wondering whether you are the problem. That's why patterns matter more than individual moments. One strange conversation doesn't tell you everything. One misunderstanding doesn't automatically mean manipulation, but repeated behavior deserves attention. So, how do you protect yourself? Start with facts. Write down what actually happened, not what someone later told you happened. If something important happens, write down the date. Write down what was said while you still remember it clearly. Save relevant messages. Not because you need to build a case against someone, but because having your own record can help you separate what you remember from what you're later being told. Then, look for patterns, not just one isolated argument. Ask yourself, does this happen repeatedly? Do they regularly deny things they previously said? Do they constantly describe your feelings as irrational? Do you always end up apologizing? Do you feel increasingly confused after conversations with them? These questions aren't about diagnosing someone. They're about understanding what the relationship is doing to you. And when you're unsure, talk to someone you trust. Someone outside the situation can sometimes notice patterns that are difficult to see when you're emotionally involved. You don't need them to tell you exactly what to do. Sometimes, you simply need another perspective, because manipulation becomes harder to recognize when one person's version of reality is the only version you hear. And remember something important. You don't have to prove someone is a manipulator before you're allowed to have boundaries. You don't need a psychological label. You don't need perfect evidence. You don't need permission to say, "This doesn't feel healthy for me." And you don't have to accept someone else's version of you just because they say it confidently. Confidence doesn't automatically make someone correct, and your uncertainty doesn't automatically make you wrong. Healthy relationships can challenge you, they can disagree with you, they can tell you when you're wrong. That's normal, but healthy disagreement leaves room for both people to have a perspective. You should be able to say, "This is how I remember it," and still be treated with respect. You should be able to say, "That hurt me," without being mocked for having feelings. You should be able to say